I want to share two stories with you today that have shaped my life in more impactful ways than I thought. One is a moment of regret, and one is a moment of learning and pride. The moment of regret happened many years ago, but here in Bergen County. In a time when you could choose in the summer if you wanted to eat indoors or outdoors, my wife and I were enjoying a brunch outdoors. And there were other people enjoying brunches also indoors and outdoors. And members of our community that we knew and that we recognized were also dining at the same restaurant. And all of a sudden, a scene broke out between different diners at the restaurant. And it's irrelevant what the scene broke out over, but came a large fight, literally a fight, over a particular topic between two other parties that were dining at this restaurant outside. And both of them were members of our greater community. Names were being called, they were yelling at each other, they were about to come to fisticuffs, and it was a moment of shame and embarrassment for everyone who was there. Not knowing what to do, I stuck my head inside my menu. And I pretended like I didn't see them or know them and said nothing. Eventually, the moment passed, the situation changed, one of the sets went inside, both were very upset, and it diffused. But here I am, almost 8-9 years later, still riddled with guilt from that moment. In a moment, I'll tell you why I'm riddled with guilt. The second moment that has impacted me was the most random of moments ever that I did not watch live. I watched it the next day from television because it was the leading and breaking story on TV about 5 years ago, maybe 6. It was the Miss America pageant, and Steve Harvey was hosting. And he got the wrong data and announced incorrectly, but through no fault of his own, that who he had crowned as Miss America was not indeed the rightful winner. And he had to get up in front of the audience and in front of the contestants and in front of all of America who was watching and say, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake." And as a result of it, he was the punchline. Talk shows and nightly shows across America, people were making jokes at his expense. And I remember never being more proud of a man I've never met before, and Steve Harvey. I remember talking to my kids about it at Shabbat dinner. I remember penning an op-ed about it, that I was so proud of what he did. Because although it wasn't his mistake, and he didn't cast the blame on anyone else, he just stood up in front of America and said, "I was wrong. I'm sorry. I didn't intend to cause these feelings. Please accept my apology." He didn't blame the underling or the producer or the person you didn't see. He just took responsibility. And for me, that was a watershed moment in how it was I wanted to continue to live my life and the ethics I wanted my kids to learn. Now, I was so bothered from that first moment of not saying something, of not interrupting, of not stopping that argument at that restaurant because of a story from the Talmud that has shaped Jewish history. It's the story known as Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. It's a fight that happens between two parties at an actual party. So two entities at a party get into a fight. And one kicks the other one out of the party. And the other one doesn't want to go. He's embarrassed and mortified. And at the party are sitting all of the rabbis, the elders, the judges, the people who are the legislators of the community. And what did they do when this moment happened? They put their noses in their menus, so to speak. They said nothing. And what the anonymous author of the Talmud tells us from that moment is that their silence was a form of consent. that by them saying nothing in this moment, they were approving the eviction of this man from the party. And this man ends up becoming so upset from the party that he starts a series of events that leads to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which has forever changed our identity as a people. Think about those rabbis and judges had they taken their nose out of the menu and said something for a moment. Had they spoken up for a moment? Had they been honest for a moment? Had they intervened for a moment? Now, luckily, in the case that I shared, no losses of life happened. People moved on. Their bruises have since healed, and it wasn't as catastrophic as that moment of the temple being destroyed. But as a rabbi and a community leader, my silence in some situations can be easily interpreted not as a disengagement, but as a consent. And sometimes it can add to consent for even bad behavior. After the death of George Floyd, I received a letter from someone who I share a very close relationship with, who I admire and respect, and I believe she admires and respects me. And she said to me, "Rabbi, I love you, but I'm disappointed in you." And when it comes from someone who you love and you admire, those words have even more impact. She said, "It's been 10 days and you haven't spoken out about the death of George Floyd." And what I realized in that moment from her and from other people is that sometimes rabbinic leaders have a responsibility to speak up. They have a responsibility to say things even though it's going to make some people squirm. It's going to make some people uncomfortable. It's going to add a voice to the tension in the room. And that's okay. It's not the first time I've made some of you mad. And with the help of God, it won't be the last time. But I pray that when I put my head on my pillow at night, and you put your head on your pillow at night, that my kids, and one day, God, my grandkids, and that you know exactly where I am and where I stand. So that's why on this Shabbat, I have chosen to talk about something that is important for me to share. And it's going to make some of you watching upset. You might even flip the switch off of the screens in which you're watching. Some of you might squirm, and some of you might applaud. But I promise you, nothing I am saying is to make you squirm or to make you applaud, but rather to fulfill what I believe is my responsibility in sharing my thoughts. And of course, I'm talking about the upcoming election. Now, let me start by saying, at no point today or ever will I tell you who you should vote for. That's a personal choice. And the ballot is much bigger than just the presidential choice. And there are lots of choices on there to be made. I grew up in a time where you never shared who you voted for. That was a private question, more private than asking a woman their age. Today, we wear it as a badge, who we voted for, and we judge people based on it. And I think that's wrong. I do love the idea that we say we voted, and that we can wear with pride a sticker that says we did our civic duty. But I hate when we have to share and make it so out there who we vote for, and that to champion or demonize the people who we vote for as a result of it. But as someone who finds it his responsibility to share a sense of morality with our community, there are things on the ballot that have me troubled this election cycle. More so than I have in other times. Now, all elections are contentious, and all of them have sides fighting with each other. And that's okay. I'm not here on this bema to talk to you about universal health care. I'm not here on this bema to talk to you about taxes. I'm not here on this bema to talk to you about free education and whether it should be or shouldn't be. I'm not here to talk to you about Amy Coney Barrett and whether or not the system is being gamed to one's advantage or another, or her bona fides in becoming a Supreme Court justice. That is in the world of acceptable debate, conversation, being seen from different sides and celebrating those different views. The issues that I have to do with morality, and issues in particular of bad behavior, and owning a sense of bad behavior, and our silence in the face of bad behavior. Now, I've stood on this bema, and I have called out people, or let me rephrase that. I have stood on this bema and shared the Jewish view that makes it against Jewish law to eat shellfish. But some people listen to that law and say, okay, and they still enjoy their lobster. That's your right. Some people will, by the way, enjoy that lobster even in front of me. They'll invite me to a dinner and enjoy it. That's their prerogative. And it's the same way it is your prerogative to choose who it is that you want to support in the election. But that doesn't mean because you might not feel comfortable ever eating lobster again, that I shouldn't say that the Torah forbids X, Y, or Z. There are people in our synagogue who engage in inappropriate extramarital relationships. Does that mean I should skip the law that tells us that adultery is wrong because some people might feel that I shouldn't discuss it as the rabbi? Of course not. My issues today that I plan to bring up with you are issues of our responsibility to speak out when there is wrong and to speak up when there is right. I will tell you that I was one of two conservative rabbis sitting in Jerusalem the day that the embassy was inaugurated. And I couldn't have been prouder. And for those of you who remember or ever have trouble sleeping and then read my material to help you fall asleep, you'll know that I wrote an extensive and widely published article about my incredible sadness that I wasn't surrounded by other Democrats at that embassy opening. You'll know that when I was in the East Room of the White House with the announcement of the new peace deal just a few weeks before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, I was one of only 2 rabbis in the entire room to celebrate an initiative for peace. So the idea that what I'm sharing is partisan isn't true. She's fine, let her keep talking. She's agreeing with me, I think. This is not about partisanship. It's about calling balls and strikes. And frankly, what has gotten to me in a place where I cannot put my nose in the menu has been name-calling, debasing, and dividing and derision of parts and people in our country that has just been below the belt, unfair, and wrong. To say in an interview, I never said lock them up or lock her up, followed by a clip in Muskegon, Michigan, not far from where I grew up in Detroit, where he says, lock them all up, referring to a governor who had people arrested. People were arrested because they had a plot to assassinate her and take her away and charge her in a mock court and execute her. And to fan the fire by saying I never said it when there is clear data that says he did, that's a problem for me. It's a problem of honesty. It's a problem of clearness. It's a problem of expressing oneself. To call names of different people who are running for office like monster and crooked and lion and sleepy is beneath the dignity of what we are as people and Americans. If you want to say, I don't believe in this candidate's direction or vision or where they're going, or I don't think you're going to be in the best hands, you have every right in which to do that. To behave in a way that is so cruel, mean, and derisive is something far beyond the issue of partisanship. And frankly, what I look for in any leader, whether they are an elected official, whether they are a clergy person, whether they are a CEO, is I look for someone who can behave in their moments of leadership the way that Steve Harvey behaved in that one moment. And I'm not saying every moment of Steve Harvey's life, in that one moment, to own some sense of humility and responsibility. Because we are bigger, greater, and better than this set of division. We are bigger, greater, and stronger than name-calling and pejorative titles and calling out and ignoring that which is politically expedient. We are better than that. But it relies on us individually to take our noses out of our menus and to speak up where there's wrong, even if we feel like it could go against the grain of what it is we believe in. I stood on this bema, and I don't have enough fingers and toes to tell you how many times I spoke out against the JCPOA, which was the Iran deal. I was against it. Sylvain sat here. He knows how many times I spoke out against it. But that doesn't necessarily mean in speaking out against it that I'm therefore no longer a Democrat. And it doesn't mean that if someone challenges the behavior of our sitting president that they are no longer Republican or hold true to Republican values. It means that we're just calling those balls and strikes as we see them based on a sense of behavior, not on a sense of policy. And we have a moral responsibility to say, you can disagree on policy, but we have to have a universal form of behavior. And the reason I share it this Shabbat is twofold. One, we're on the eve of a national election. And two, the portion tells us Noah was a righteous person, bidorotav, in his generation. What does in his generation mean? What does that mean? That everyone else was ignoring these behaviors? Everyone else was sticking their nose inside their menu? No one else was owning responsibility when they did something wrong like Steve Harvey did? What does that mean in his generation? Shouldn't morality be intergenerational? Shouldn't morality be a responsibility that transcends from one to the next, regardless of color or background? Shouldn't morality be something that Jews and Christians and Muslims can share? Shouldn't morality be something that Canadians and Mexicans and Americans can have in common? Can't kindness and goodness all be on the same page? Since when does the issue of morality and goodness become partisan? When is the issue of morality a Republican, Democrat, or independent stand? And to claim it is silly. Morality is bipartisan, and speaking out for issues of morality is our greatest responsibility. I close with a story from the Talmud. The third story that has impacted my life in a significant way. A story of Hillel and Shammai, who we are told in Masechet Eruvin, page 13b, Yud Gimel Daf Bet, that they went to go visit Rabbi Yochanan ben Achoronit. It was Sukkot, and Hillel and Shammai, these two schools of thought that were divided on practically everything, the Hatfields and the McCoys, the Republicans and the Democrats, they went to go visit the house of Yochanan ben Achoronit, the elder, on Sukkot. The first thing that you need to take stock of in this story is that these two schools of thought, these two divergent opinions, these two camps joined together to go visit the elderly. They found enough commonality in doing right and in visiting and loving and being kind that transcended their issues of division. And the second part of the story tells us exactly why it is that we follow Hillel more than Shammai. Because when they went to go visit Yochanan ben Achoronit, he wasn't fulfilling the mitzvah of Sukkah in the most perfect way. So what happened? Shammai said, "You're getting it wrong. You're not fulfilling the mitzvah." And Hillel said nothing. He didn't stand in judgment, but wished him well. Meaning, God could care less about the merits of the argument, but God could not care more about the way in which the argument takes place. I want to say that again. God could care less about the merits of the argument, but God could not care more about how the argument is had. We are Jewish, we are humans, we are allowed to differ, and we should celebrate our differences. And all of us, myself included, have to be better at how we accept people who think, behave, and have an orientation on life, a posture at different things that are different than ours. We all have to be better at it. But we also have to realize, in following Hillel and Shammai, the commonality of ground that we could share on, and the ability of how it is that we can disagree with a sense of morality and kindness, without derision and name-calling and castigating, that must come back to be a central foundation of our country. Look what happened in Israel in 1995, in November, right around this time, when the country could not have been more divided, and 3 bullets shocked that country back into a shared rhythm. Those 3 bullets also took out the life of Yitzhak Rabin. And in Israel today, we're right back to that sense of division. And we're here today too. We can't afford it. All of us need to take our nose out of our menu. All of us need to take a sense of responsibility and use our voices at the water cooler, in the Zoom call, in social media to call out the balls and strikes we see. People want to have different opinions. May God bless them and keep them. But when there's a behavior that's a basic morality that someone is transgressing, we must call it out. Because I regret to this day my silence as a form of assent, as I'm sure the rabbis and judges at that party did, which led to the destruction of the temple. And I, for one, feel that I will not put my head on the pillow and tell my children and grandchildren generations from now, I put my head in the menu. I didn't want to engage. I didn't want to create a sense of uncomfortableness for people. Because Noah stood up to all of the others, so will I, and I hope you will too. Our future, like that of the temple and that of humanity in the time of Noah, our future depends on our voice. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Page